Hello everybody, this is Kirby over yonder, and as someone who has been a very big fan of Nickelodeon's SpongeBob SquarePants ever since he was a little kid, it was very heartbreaking for me to hear that Stephen Hillenburg had passed away. He had created something that was so universally enjoyable by anyone of any age. I have so much respect for this man, and I hope he's in a good place. In honor of his passing, I would like to talk about my favorite episode from every season of SpongeBob, but before I do that, I want to say a few more words about Stephen Hillenburg. Thank you, voiceover squill. In all seriousness, I didn't know what to think when I heard the news that Hillenburg had passed away, and I know I'm kind of late to this, but, I've been busy with a lot of things, so I haven't had the most time to work on videos, but Hillenburg, man, he created something, like I said, that can be so universally enjoyed by everyone. SpongeBob very much had a lot of adult humor, not just like dirty jokes, but even just jokes that, maybe kids wouldn't get as well, but adults would get. But it still had jokes for kids as well. And I think SpongeBob as a character is very easy to connect with because he's very optimistic and very much looks on the bright side of things. And I know that a lot of people really enjoy that character because he represents a very positive, very optimistic side of just living. And I know that I personally do kind of try to be like SpongeBob in a lot of ways because I oftentimes find myself trying to look on the bright side of things and appreciating what I have. And I think that's the thing that I like most about SpongeBob's character. You'll see, like, in a lot of Disney movies, characters will be saying, I want more than what I have, but SpongeBob, despite not having a lot when you think about it, he just is kind of a mundane, normal guy. He is so appreciative of just everything that he has, and I think that that's very admirable. So I do try to be like that sometimes in my everyday life, and the fact that Stephen Hillenburg actually used to be a marine biologist before he worked on SpongeBob. I think that's really cool, and you can definitely see something. You can see, the influence of that in SpongeBob. Like, there's the part where SpongeBob says, "Can you reproduce by budding?" And then a bunch of little SpongeBobs come out of him. So yeah, I don't think this world will truly be the same without Stephen Hillenburg, and the fact that he died at the tragically young age of 59, that's horrible. He's such a good man, and there was so much creativity to SpongeBob, and he was truly an admirable guy, and I don't know. I don't know. That's all I have to say, I guess. So, with that being said, on to my list with my favorite episode of Season 1. Thank you, live action squill. So, my favorite episode of not just Season 1, but the entire show has got to be Pizza Delivery, with honorable mentions going to SB129 and Rock Bottom. Good lord, this episode. Where do you even begin with this episode? This episode has some of the most memorable jokes in all of SpongeBob. There's the Krusty Krab pizza song. There's, "It's not just a boulder, it's a rock." There's the pioneer dance. There's the guy yelling about his drink. There's the part where SpongeBob stops and says, "Squidward." This episode is just comedy gold. I also really like the story in this episode, where SpongeBob and Squidward have to travel so far just to deliver a pizza. It's simple, but it's fun to watch these contrasting personalities bounce off of each other. I also really like the ending to this episode, where Squidward actually stands up for SpongeBob. It's a very heartwarming and satisfying ending to the story. Also, for an episode that takes place in the middle of nowhere, it's always interesting to watch because there's always something new or interesting happening. For all those reasons and more, Pizza Delivery remains my favorite episode in all of SpongeBob. However, the next episode is not far behind. My favorite episode of Season 2 is Band Geeks, with honorable mentions going to Christmas Who and Squid on Strike. This is many people's favorite episode, and for good reason. There are a lot of things I really like in the episode. For one, we get to see a lot of the main characters all at the same time, which isn't something we see often in SpongeBob. All of the characters play off of each other very well in this episode. I also really like the story to this episode. I mean, first off, it introduces the greatest character in all of existence. But it's also really cool getting to see an episode from Squidward's perspective, and how he actually manages to get a happy ending in this one. This episode also contains possibly the greatest scene in the entire show, Sweet Victory. First off, the song is amazing. Second off, the animation is amazing. And third, it's just such a good ending to this episode, after seeing Squidward be so miserable. In fact, this scene is so good that people have actually petitioned for Sweet Victory to be played at the Super Bowl in honor of Stephen Hillenburg's passing, and it seems like that might actually be happening. Let's just hope Maroon 5 doesn't ruin it. I swear, if I hear Girls Like You one more time, I'm going to take this pencil and shove it up somebody's... My favorite Season 3 episode is the Krusty Krab training video, with honorable mentions to Chocolate with Nuts and Wet Painters. This is such an interesting episode. The fact that it's presented like a training video makes it very unique from other SpongeBob episodes. It really feels like the writers watched a bunch of training videos before writing this episode, with all the bad editing and cheesy jokes thrown in there. I don't know if any other show has done an episode like this, so it really stands out. And speaking of jokes, this episode is definitely up there with Pizza Delivery and being one of the funniest episodes of the entire show. A classic episode in my opinion. My favorite Season 4 episode is Dunces and Dragons, with honorable mentions going to Have You Seen the Snail and Krusty Towers. Basically, in this episode, SpongeBob and Patrick get sent back to the olden times and have to slay a demon. This is just a really fun episode. It's so cool getting to see SpongeBob and Patrick in this setting, and they make a lot of great jokes out of it. I also really like all of the royal music in this episode. I think it's very fitting. I'm really glad that they decided to make this episode a 22-minute episode as opposed to the normal 11-minute episode, because I feel like it helps flesh out the story more. And yeah, this episode has a pretty epic story that doesn't take itself too seriously and is just fun. In fact, I think that's the best word to describe this episode. It's just really, really fun. My favorite episode from Season 5 is Friend or Foe, with honorable mentions going to SpongeBob vs. the Patty Gadget and Roller Cowards. This episode definitely has one of my favorite stories in SpongeBob. This is one of the few episodes that actually adds backstory and lore to the series, and although it's obviously nowhere near on the same level as something like Adventure Time, I definitely appreciate the effort. It's really cool getting to see Krabs and Plankton as kids and how they became enemies, and the episode never gets too serious or too silly. It still feels like a SpongeBob episode. I also just appreciate the writers for making an episode like this. I feel like it could have been a very risky move since it's pretty different from other SpongeBob episodes, but I think it paid off well. My favorite season 6 episode is No Hat for Pat, with honorable mentions going to Not Normal and Sandcastles in the Sand. This is another one of my favorite stories in SpongeBob. Basically, Patrick is tired of feeling like a jobless loser and wants to wear a hat, like SpongeBob. But every time he puts the hat on, he ends up falling on his face, which leads Mr. Krabs to exploit that for entertainment purposes. There are a lot of things that I really like about this episode. First off, Patrick is very likable here. In a lot of the SpongeBob episodes at around this time, Patrick was kind of a jerk, but in this episode, all he wants is to wear that hat, and you can see Patrick's pain yet happiness. And I like how SpongeBob actually stands up to Mr. Krabs, and I like how Krabs is a genuine over-the-top bad guy, and not just a greedy jerk like in most episodes. And I love the ending to this episode. It's such a sweet, nice ending, and I think it's very satisfying. Easily one of my favorite episodes in all of SpongeBob. My favorite Season 7 episode is Earworm, with honorable mentions going to The Abrasive Side and Squidward in Clarinet Land. In this episode, SpongeBob gets a song stuck in his head, and he gets a literal earworm. This is definitely one of the more relatable episodes to me. I can definitely relate to having a song stuck in my head, and I just can't help but listen to it and sing it. It's very relatable. It sort of reminded me of that regular show episode, This Is My Jam, where Rigby gets a song stuck in his head, and that's one of my favorite episodes in all of regular show. I also like how by the end, SpongeBob, he just goes completely insane because he can't listen to the song. It's some interesting animation, but overall a very enjoyable episode. My favorite episode of Season 8 is It's a SpongeBob Christmas, with honorable mentions going to Planet of the Jellyfish and Hello Bikini Bottom. I love this episode. First off, it's completely in stop motion, and as someone who loves stop motion, this episode is really nice to look at. The stop motion is just perfect in it, and I love how for SpongeBob they actually used a sponge. I also really like the songs in this episode, especially Don't Be a Jerk, It's Christmas, but the other two songs are also really good as well. I also really like the story in this one of SpongeBob accidentally jerkifying everyone in Bikini Bottom. And I just think that this episode does a really good job capturing the spirit of Christmas and the spirit of SpongeBob. I wouldn't say I like it quite as much as Christmas Who from Season 2, but it's pretty close. My favorite Season 9 episode is Bulletin Board, with honorable mentions going to Plankton's Pet and The Sewers of Bikini Bottom. I never thought I'd see a SpongeBob episode talk about social media, but Bulletin Board does, and actually does it surprisingly well. I really like how they decided to use the bulletin board as a metaphor for social media, instead of actually having social media be on the show. I just think it works a lot better that way, and it's a lot less pandering. I also really like the message that when it comes with the internet, a lot of things get misinterpreted. Since you're not actually speaking, people can't tell your tone of voice, so something that may be innocent to you may appear as not so innocent to someone else. They also get a lot of good jokes out of all of the weird things that people post. And overall, I just think this is a very well-crafted episode. My favorite Season 10 episode is Mimic Madness, with honorable mentions going to Mermaid Pants and Feral Friends. This episode is really cool, where SpongeBob basically starts imitating all of his friends, and because of that, he starts losing his identity. This episode really shows off how good of a voice actor Tom Kenny is, because he imitates all of the characters really well in this episode. I also really like seeing all of the weird shapes that SpongeBob turns into. This episode is such a treat to look at visually. This episode also has a song in it, which I think is really good. And overall, this is just a really creative and interesting episode that I could really only see this show doing. And last but absolutely not least, my favorite episode of Season 11 is Karen's Virus, with honorable mentions going to Legends of Bikini Bottom and My Leg. This episode is so cool. So basically, SpongeBob has to go inside Karen because she has a virus. I absolutely love this episode's usage of CGI, and the world that is created within Karen is really cool looking. I also really like Karen's weird versions of all of the characters, especially Buff Plankton. I think he's really funny. This episode just has so much creativity to it, and is overall one of my favorite episodes of the entire show. So those were my favorite SpongeBob episodes. I really enjoyed doing SpongeBob videos, as both the show and the character put me in a very cheery mood. And with this video in particular, it was very interesting to see the evolution of SpongeBob over the years. And if you have any ideas for SpongeBob related videos, then please let me know. I definitely have a couple, but hey, the more the merrier. And also tell me some of your favorite SpongeBob episodes and what you thought about these episodes. Have a good one. Rest in peace, Stephen Hillenburg, and Kirby out.